So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services that are refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet. We find then layers of understanding of the spring feast, autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. Namely then the cities after the time of Yohanan until 1009. There were lots of cities of the Messiah during this reign of the 1,000 years. The Messiah then, he did rule his people, and then he gave directives for the nations. So precisely this time of after Yohanan until 1009, those times of the holy cities are returning as per the instructions of the prophet. Obviously, chapter 1:8 is linked with the 61st. This means the person translating the documents did not understand then the intricacies of the holy instructions. So then, during this time where we find the nations then lining up themselves for this time of the trade of the end, linked up obviously with tabernacling, so then they understand the whole concept. It is imperative also pointing the importance of the retrieving of the nations, not participants of the designing of the starting of the trade of the end via online. The physical understanding of the dragon is already made very evident in Dubai, for instance, and also in Cancun. But doesn't stop there, must go also to the South Pacific. The South Pacific, obviously Australia would be the great nation, then leading the Southern Pacific towards then the trade of the end. Not only this, the refurbishment of the entire English language and the influence of the English-speaking people comes from the South Pacific. So then, based from this understanding, then it is valid and very imperative understanding then the function of the East, the function of the North, the function of the South. As we understand, the East is the big factory of the planet, providing basics for then infrastructure, and nations then can rebuild themselves as per the instructions of the prophet. So then, obviously there is the security part of this system, then localized in the Northern Kingdom, Soviet Union. And then the Southern Kingdom then obviously has tabernacle in the northern side of Africa, precisely on the land of Cush, per the instructions of the prophet. And then lots of raw materials, giving special focus upon then DRC, because they hold 80% of the coltan mines. Very important for the relation of the new equipment and new technologies. So then we find ourselves understanding then the East factory, the Northern Kingdom security, and then the Southern Kingdom raw materials, and most importantly, then tabernacling. So then this means any nation not part of these designers must retrieve. There is no if, oughts, or buts, or any other excuses. For instance, the influence of US must be retrieved. So then those nations related with the time of the end can do their work. As far as the security of the planet, it is obviously given to the Soviets. They are the people then in charge of the security of the world, combined with the military of China. Then we begin our understanding of the big designers, and then Africa providing those rare materials, then most importantly, then providing themselves with tabernacling. So then these designers plus the tabernacling directives then giving rise to the time of the trade of the end. So then the situation is very much set. Now comes the humbling part of the rest of the world retrieving themselves from the world's scenario of what they believed was trade mixed up with their own beliefs of God and such. This gives us then the perfect understanding of the prophet and what he was then writing and recording, so then we can be participants. And it's very important then, for instance, America then retrieving and rebuilding, because the security is taken care of. The security is provided then by China and the Soviet Union, mostly by the managers of the Northern Kingdom. The reason why, it's because then there is a note from the prophet stating in the 11th chapter related with the restoration period, then indicating then the Northern Kingdom coming with much equipment. This means the Northern Kingdom is responsible for the security of air, sea, land, and then the rest of us retrieve and rebuild. We've got a lot of work in our hands because we find ourselves in our country, for instance, Alaska, with lots of petroleum deposits, but then is out of maintenance, must be maintained. Our electric grids are very depleted with electricity, and then obviously combining these with then the nation's directives from North Dakota, because we find then the words of Gerald Nye very specific for this time in our nation. So we were not left without directive. We were given directives, and we know where then most of the country's orders of then refurbishment comes from. Obviously, North Dakota, during the time of the Second World War, they were very much aware of the dangers of wars. So then they are the qualified people of making decisions during this time of the refurbishment of our own country, while we retrieve from the world and do our own work. So then we present a decent nation for later partnership. This then restores our name thus far, because we found, for instance, in March, the visit in China didn't work. Obviously, then the leadership of Egypt, influenced by the West, didn't work. We find then the Middle East destabilized. This is showing our lack of leadership, not because we don't know how to lead, it's because it's not for us to lead anymore. Our time of leading the world is gone, ended in 2009. We were granted with a couple hundred years or so of leadership, and this time it has expired. So we must humble ourselves before the hand of the Creator, and then let Him do what's on instructions. These instructions were given more than 2,500 years ago. So there is a divine hand guiding the instructions during our time. So then the combination then of the armies of China and the Soviet Union will provide the proper peace and organization for the world then to do trade in a very near future. Lots of work ahead of us yet. There is the Middle East. There is then, for instance, Egypt must make a link with China at some point, so then they can get what they want. A government decentralized from the West, while providing then the Egyptian people with what they want as far as materials and how they want to rebuild their country. That's their decision. However, must they have a link with China of some sort. Then the rest of the Middle East, and then the European Union, obviously, then dismantling the Eurozone, so then Mr. Xi can link them up also with their system. So the future is very much set. There are other details where we find in the prophet explaining more details, more refined understanding of this time of the restoration period until prior of the starting of the autumn feast, many years yet ahead. So then this gives us the absolute certainty of the West retrieving and rebuilding and then becoming a decent partner for the trade of the end yet be established. So then we find ourselves with lots of work. But as far as our country is concerned, the orders mostly comes from North Dakota, because they did have the proper understanding during the time of the Second World War, but then the input they had during the time of the Second World War, believe it or not, was not from a viewpoint of action for the time. Those words were spoken for this time. So then the directives I've given, as far as then the position of the president, then North Dakota must work with him. As far as ex-presidents get involved in the midst of present situation is kind of ridiculous. A president out of duty has no part in mixing up himself with then the trade of the world, where we do not have any trade anymore. So we don't understand why both presidents are in Africa. Our time of leadership ended in 2009. So we don't know what they are trying to do. But we do know that their idea of the Ozarks as the new capital of our country is ridiculous. What are they going to order from there? The order is then obviously coming from North Dakota, and as far as trade is coming from the freighters. And not only this, as the world is preparing itself for then the time of the trade of the end, then taxation via freighting is extremely important. But then comes the order from North Dakota how to do this situation, then making sure our country is removed from the world's wars, and then going against the arms factory, as then Gerald Knight has mentioned. And that's precisely what is required for our nation then to become decent and then productive and becoming then a decent partner for the time of the end. Thus far we have nothing going on in our country. We have a very bad grid. We have lack of electricity. We have lack of infrastructure. Our roads are crumbling. Our then petroleum from Alaska, we have lots of amount of gas and petroleum. They are not maintained properly. And we are overextending ourselves for no reason. So then it is truly imperative the retrieving of our forces instantly. So then we can do our work in becoming then decent partners for the time of the end. So then please stay tuned. Much more coming up.